When reading this story, it's easy to get caught up in the face value of it. Jesus asks a Samaritan woman for a drink from a well. They're at a well, Jesus and the Samaritan woman. She's got a bucket, he's thirsty, he asks her for a drink. Should be simple, shouldn't it? But with Jesus, nothing's ever what it seems. Nothing ever comes across as being that simple. Jews and Samaritans don't mix. Ever. So Jesus is once again swinging a stick at the wasp's nest of public opinion. But when I began to ponder this section of scripture, I also then began to think of some slightly different characters who could be put in the same situation. What if this was, say, a Brexiteer and a Remainer in the pub? A Christian who's against gay marriage and a gay couple in Costa? I had a lot more variations on this theme as I began to think about just how extraordinary this move of Jesus was at the time. In modern day Palestine, this would be explosive. A Jew talking to a member of Hamas publicly. Can you imagine the public reaction? It really was that extreme. Although the Samaritans themselves were a devout group whose heritage was Hebrew, the Samaritans were shunned by the Jews of the day and written off as some weird cult that worshipped at a mountain. They're used by Jesus several times to illustrate kingdom principles and to shame the religious authorities. This in and of itself starts to tell us more about the message of Jesus, but that's not where I'm focusing today. Jesus commands us to love your neighbour. Loving your neighbour is not just about loving the ones that make your cakes or keep an eye on the house. It's the noisy neighbour with the screaming kids, or the annoying one that throws their hedge trimmings on your side. It's the drug addict, the homeless, the poor, the weak. These are the ones who Jesus calls us to minister to. The last, the lost, the least. They were his mission field, and they still are. And here he is again, in this glimpse of his ministry, reaching out to those who were the last, the lost, and the least. At least of his day, the social outcasts. And the woman was not just a Samaritan. Jesus prophesies to her and tells her things about herself through words of knowledge, things she's surprised he has any idea about, but recognises him as a prophet as he began to talk to her. But more comes out of this. It reinforces her understanding that he really shouldn't be talking to her, should not be associating with her at all, shouldn't even be in the same place. They shouldn't be seen together. She's a woman of such low standing by the standards of the day. As I thought through the rest of the story, it becomes even more astonishing. Through the act of crossing that perceived social boundary, Jesus is able to reveal his true nature to this woman, his entire mission, his reason for being on the earth. The true nature of Jesus is laid bare in this little glimpse of scripture, the awesome, full-on might and holy power of Jesus expressed. He is the fulfillment of the prophecies in Hebrew scripture. He is the Messiah that they've been waiting for. He goes on to tell her that neither the Temple Mount in Jerusalem nor Mount Gerizim, which will be the place of worship, but that he will be available to all, that the holy power of God will be accessible to everyone who seeks him in spirit and truth. This is not just a bit of a story to share around the campfire, something to warm the heart because it sounds good. This is earth-shatteringly changing. This is world-changing, turning it up on its head. Jesus here prophesies the Spirit of God being able and available to anyone who will believe. No longer will God be stuck behind the curtain of the temple in Jerusalem. No longer will the Levite priest have the sole right to talk to God. It won't just be down to the priesthood or where you happen to be geographically. It doesn't have to be at the Holy Mount in Jerusalem, doesn't have to be on the mountain. God is making ready to break out into the world. And Jesus uses this story, this time, this moment with the Samaritan woman to begin to talk about what that really means. God is revealed through Jesus in this moment. God desires to reach out and touch all who would believe in him, to break apart the walls that divide us and bring the community of faith together in spirit and truth. This message is as radical today as it was then. Perhaps even more so as we see nations these days divided, the shadows of nationalistic fascism becoming visible across the Western world, and whatever they call themselves, that's what's going on. And extremist ideologies grabbing the attention of the young, the impressionable, and those who are just desperate for change. This world is desperate for a message of hope and peace, desperate to be released from the unbridled greed of capitalism, the hatred of racism, and the division of politics. Once again, the troublesome rabbi from Nazareth does it again. Can you imagine the headlines if this was today? The tirades that would be on social media. It would be trending. Hashtag Jesus talks to Samaritan. The hate it would generate. In this world where we're so used to quick judgments, alternate facts, and a social system which seems to only continue to further weaken the already weak and remove power from the already powerless. Where food banks have become the normal, where the divide between the richest and the poorest seems bigger than it's ever been. Not only that, he then lets this Samaritan woman go to her hometown, and Jesus ends up with a crowd all wanting to hear what he has to say. The troublesome rabbi is not content with talking to just one Samaritan. Now he's talking to a whole town. He's seeking to break out the message that God's messenger has arrived. The Messiah is here and that God is ready to break out into the world. We live right now in this promise. We live in the world that God has chosen to break out into. So how can we respond? The mission remains the same today. Love God, love one another, heal the sick, feed the hungry, clothe the poor. That's it. We as a people and community of faith are called to those who society shuns. This is not an optional module of the How to Be a Christian course. It's fundamental to our faith. Reaching out to the last, the lost and the least is important to God. It's why Jesus talks about it so much. It's why he spends all his time with those people through Scripture. He asked for it to be important to us as well. It's why there are so many examples of it through the New Testament. He's leading the way, showing us what it means to follow him. Now, I have the benefit now of working for a church. So those of you who know me will now start a job over at Ringwood. And that means I come across people all the time who need some help or some support from God's people. A food bank voucher, a cup of coffee, to chat with someone before they go back to being alone in their flat. I spent 30 years in the mission field of youth work full time, working with young people and families who everyone else had given up on, or who were on the edges of their communities or in trouble with one authority or another. Spent time in court with these young people, talking on their behalf, advocating for them. My mission field has changed, but the message of Jesus in my life has not. He still calls me to go out and look for the last, the lost, and the least. He still wants me to love my neighbour. He still wants me to consider my prejudices and find ways to break through them. He still wants me to talk to the Samaritan woman at the well, and then to her town, to break out of my safe places, to comfort those who mourn, to feed those who are hungry, to provide for those who have nothing. His mission to us, his church, has not changed. His message to us has not changed. His demands of us as his people are the same. The only question is whether you're prepared to ask for that drink of water.